Under the ever-watchful sun of Obosi, a city alive with the rhythm of drums, the scent of spicy pepper soup, and the colors of woven cloths fluttering in the marketplace, lived Obiora, a man known across the city not just for his wealth but for his sharp mind and careful ways. As the CEO of a thriving company that touched many parts of West Africa, he was respected and sometimes feared, but what nobody knew was his secret. Obiora pretended he could not see. Every day, behind the tall glass walls of his office, he would close his eyes and act blind, moving slowly and cautiously, pretending the world was dark and quiet around him. His reason was simple: many women chased after him only for his riches and power, and Obiora wanted to scare them all away. "If they think I am blind, they will leave me alone," he often told himself with a secret smile, thinking it a clever trick to keep his life simple and free of unwanted attention. But the truth was more complicated, for deep in his heart, Obiora longed to find a woman who would see him for who he truly was, not for what he owned or the name he bore. So when his family, tired of his stubborn refusal to marry, arranged yet another blind date for him, he prepared his act carefully, ready to close his eyes and pretend once more. The woman who came that day was Amara, a young woman from a nearby village with skin like polished mahogany and eyes that held stories of faraway places and quiet strength. If you love stories that open your eyes and warm your heart, hit the subscribe button below and turn on the notifications so you never miss a single tale. She was nothing like the many women who had come before her: no fancy clothes, no loud laughter or shallow smiles, just a steady kindness that wrapped around her like a soft shawl. Amara came not to chase wealth or status but with hope in her heart and courage in her steps. When she arrived at Obiora's grand home, she was shown to the sitting room where he waited, eyes shut as always. She spoke gently, not afraid of his blindness but rather curious, asking questions about the city, the market smells, and the songs the children sang outside. Obiora listened, pretending to hear nothing, but each word she spoke stirred something inside him, a warmth he had never felt before. Over the days that followed, Amara returned, not just for the meetings arranged by family, but because she wanted to know the man behind the silence, the one who seemed to hide behind closed eyes. She shared tales of her village, the green hills where palm trees swayed in the breeze, the laughter of her brothers as they played football barefoot on dusty fields, and the smell of fresh yam roasted over fire. Obiora, in turn, found himself talking without pretending, telling her of his fears and dreams, his loneliness beneath the polished surface of power. Around them, Obosi moved with its own stories, women bargaining fiercely over tomatoes and peppers, elders seated under the shade of the great baobab tree telling tales of ancestors, and the distant beat of the talking drum calling people to gatherings or celebrations. Yet in the quiet between these noises, Obiora and Amara built a world where sight did not matter, where the truth was measured by heartbeats and honesty. But this new friendship, fragile as a young sapling, faced storms from the start. Obiora's family disapproved, worried that Amara's humble roots would never fit in with their high society, while rivals watched and whispered, hoping to pull Obiora back into a life of carefully crafted lies and lonely power. Yet neither Obiora nor Amara gave way. She saw past his eyes closed tight, knowing they hid not darkness but a man afraid to be seen. He saw in her a light that no darkness could dim, a courage that made him want to open his eyes for real and face the world anew. This was just the beginning of a story where pretense would meet truth, where love would challenge pride, and where the heart would learn that sometimes, the greatest vision is the one that sees beyond what the eyes show. And so, beneath the blazing sun of Obosi, where the market cries faded into the night and the stars blinked like ancient eyes, Obiora and Amara began a journey not just of a man pretending blindness, but of two souls finding sight in each other's hearts. The first time Amara stepped into Obiora's family compound, she felt like a visitor in a palace carved from polished stone and old secrets, for the walls were high, the iron gates taller than a giraffe's head, and the guards dressed in neat uniforms that did not match the dust of the Obosi streets beyond, yet she walked in with her head high and her back straight, unaware that behind the carved windows upstairs, Obiora's stepmother, Madame Chinyu, and his cousin, Ikechukwu, were watching closely, whispering in sour tones about that village girl who had somehow crossed the threshold into their fortress of wealth, unaware that in their minds, no one from a small village could ever deserve a seat at the table where contracts worth millions were signed and secrets were kept tighter than a gourd of palm wine in the hands of a thirsty elder. But Amara did not come seeking gold or granite, she came with a quiet strength, the kind that wrapped itself around others without asking permission. And while Obiora sat in the garden pretending he could not see her, his eyes hidden behind dark glasses he always wore indoors, he listened closely to the sound of her voice, like the river that ran through his grandfather's village long ago, clear, deep, and unstoppable, and when she spoke, Obiora felt as if the world he had kept at bay for years with money, walls, and silence was slowly crawling back into his life with the patience of an old tortoise, and though he told himself it was just an act, just one more game to send another suitor away, something in her words made him forget where the act ended and the truth began, and that frightened him more than anything, for Obiora had built his entire adult life on control of emotions, of staff, of numbers, of outcomes, even of his own reputation, and now this one woman, with nothing but an honest laugh and stories about her father's cocoa farm, was shaking that entire foundation with every visit. Yet while Amara found joy in every little conversation they shared, even if he never looked her in the eye, Madame Chinyu was burning with silent anger, for she had her own plans built on marrying Obiora to the daughter of her late sister, a girl named Neka who wore high heels so tall they clicked like hailstones on tiles and whose perfume entered a room 5 seconds before she did, for Neka was beautiful by the city's measure, loud where Amara was calm, dressed like a television presenter, and had already told her friends that she would one day be the madam of Abosi's tallest mansion, and so when she heard that Obiora was entertaining a girl with no family name, no social standing, and no car of her own, she stormed into Madame Chinyu's room, her lipstick brighter than her voice, and cried, "Auntie, is this how you treat me after all I have done for this family?" And Madame Chinyu, who had long treated Obiora as a pawn in her climb to power, comforted Neka and promised that this embarrassment would not last, for she believed that Amara, like the others before her, would run away once Obiora kept up his act long enough, and she doubled her efforts to pressure Obiora's father, Chief Omenka, who though retired, still held influence in the family, whispering to him at night that Obiora's mind was clouded by pity for a poor girl and that the company would fall if they allowed this foolish relationship to continue. But what neither of them knew was that Obiora, while pretending to be blind to Amara, was starting to see through the darkness of his own life, for Amara's presence reminded him of the warmth he had forgotten in the cold rooms of board meetings and international calls, and the memory of his late mother, a woman of few words and many stories, came flooding back each time Amara hummed a village lullaby or corrected his Igbo with gentle amusement, making him realize how much of his roots he had traded for spreadsheets and stiff necks. And on the day Amara arrived with a basket of ube and roasted corn she had prepared herself, Obiora, whose eyes remained hidden, reached for the food with both hands and whispered thank you in a tone so soft it made Amara pause, for it was the first time his voice carried no pride, only hunger, not for food, but for something deeper, and she smiled, though part of her heart felt confused, for how could a man who lived in a house with 10 rooms, marble floors, and a driver who wore gloves be so lonely? And though she had not come seeking love, she began to wonder what it meant to fall for someone who would not even open his eyes to see her face, and when she told her elder sister in the village, her sister simply said, "Amara, some eyes are closed because of pride, but some are closed because they are afraid to open and see what they've lost," and with those words in her heart, she returned to Obiora again and again, even when the guards began to look at her with mocking eyes and the housekeeper offered her leftover tea instead of a fresh pot, and she held her head high because she saw something in Obiora that no one else seemed to, a wounded man hiding behind a performance, and while others were trying to marry into his name, she was simply trying to know the man behind it, But all the while, storms were gathering, for Nneka was not a girl who lost battles gracefully, and one evening, she arranged for a photographer to catch Amara stepping out of Obiora's gate with the food basket in her hand and posted it online with the caption, "Village girl sneaking out of CEO's mansion, another one chasing the money." And though Amara did not use social media, the gossip spread like harmattan fire, reaching even the corners of the village where elders clicked their tongues, and friends began to tease her siblings, asking if their sister had become the next city madam. And when Amara found out, her heart sank, but she did not cry, for her spirit had been trained by years of silence, hard work, and lessons from women who knew how to rise from ridicule like cassava rising from wet earth. And she confronted Obiora in the garden the next morning, asking in a voice steady and calm, "Is this what you wanted, to laugh with me in private and shame me in public?" And for the first time since they met, Obiora removed his glasses and opened his eyes, just for a second, not enough for the guards or the nosy cousin to notice, but enough for Amara to gasp, for in that brief glance, she saw that the eyes behind the lie were clear, sharp, and fully seeing, and Obiora, realizing what he had done, quickly put his glasses back on and whispered, "I never wanted to hurt you. I just didn't want to be tricked again." And Amara, whose heart was both furious and fragile, turned and walked away, leaving the food basket on the bench, untouched, and as she disappeared down the gravel path, Obiora sat still, his head in his hands, knowing that his performance had finally crumbled in front of the only woman who had not asked him for anything. And that night, while the house buzzed with news of a board meeting and Madame Chinyu plotted again with Nneka to announce a fake engagement in front of the press, Obiora sat alone in his room, remembering the first day Amara laughed in his presence, the way she tilted her head when listening, and the times she said, "Even the blind can see what is true if they open their hearts." And he knew then that the game he had played for so long had turned into a trap he built with his own hands, and he had lost the only person who made him want to live truthfully, while Amara, walking home under the full moon, heard voices call out from street corners and saw children still chasing tires through puddles, and though the city mocked her with each billboard of perfume models and luxury cars, she kept walking with dignity, knowing that even if Obiora never apologized, she had seen something rare, a man torn between fear and truth, and that one glimpse of his eyes had shown her more than all his words ever could. And as she reached the old compound where she rented a single room beside a widow and her twins, she sat on her wooden bed, untouched corn in her lap, and whispered to herself, "Let him come, or let him stay gone, but I will not chase shadows." And outside her window, the city of Obosi breathed slowly into the night, unaware that a battle had just begun, not of fists or money, but of pride and forgiveness, of truth breaking through lies, and of two hearts deciding whether sight was enough to see what really mattered. It had been 4 long days since Amara had walked out of Obiora's compound, leaving behind the basket of food she'd lovingly prepared and the quiet hope she carried with every step she took toward him before knowing the full truth. And in those 4 days, the city of Obosi had not paused for heartbreak. The horns still blared from Danfo buses zigzagging through the streets, market women still shouted over onions and plantain, and the big city gossip still flowed like palm wine from plastic bottles under shade trees. But inside both Amara and Obiora, everything had shifted like the dry season wind that sweeps away old dust to uncover forgotten things. And though Amara tried to go on with her daily life, sweeping her one-room apartment, fetching water from the borehole with the widow's children, and making akra to sell at the corner where morning workers passed, something inside her remained unsettled, not just because of the lies she had uncovered, but because the man who told it had opened his eyes for her, and that one moment had spoken louder than all the quiet lies before it, for in that flicker, she saw not a deceiver but a man who had lost his way inside his own disguise, a man drowning in a performance he no longer knew how to end, and in her chest was a growing ache she could not name, part anger, part pity, and part something else, something she didn't want to admit out loud in case it turned out to be love. And across the city, behind the cold glass of his high-rise office overlooking the Obosi skyline, Obiora stared at nothing, his eyes now open but not really seeing, for his mind was elsewhere, on Amara's expression when she saw through him, on the disappointment that burned in her silence, on the realization that she had every right to walk away. And yet, he also remembered her quiet strength, the way she never asked him for gifts or favors, the way she listened like she was harvesting truth from the air, and he knew with certainty that no other woman had ever looked at him like that, not even the ones who said they loved him, because none of them had ever truly seen him, only the idea of him, the status, the empire, the money, but Amara had seen him before he even opened his eyes, and now that she was gone, everything felt wrong, as if the sun was slightly off its course, as if the clock ticked too slowly, and as if the food prepared by his overpaid chef tasted like salted paper. But before Obiora could find a way to reach out, to apologize or explain or simply admit what he could not even say to himself, storms were gathering faster than he realized, for Madame Chinyu, who had noticed his mood and guessed correctly that Amara's departure had something to do with it, decided that now was the time to strike, and with Nneka eager to play her part, they staged a scene at the family house, one involving a false report from a spiritual advisor who claimed that Obiora's destiny could only flourish if he married a woman with a powerful name and family connections, and Amara, whose name carried no weight in business or politics, was therefore a curse to his future, a spiritual blockage that could destroy his empire. And though Obiora no longer gave ear to such tricks, they made sure the news was loud enough to travel to the media, to business partners, and to anyone whose opinion could sway stockholders, and suddenly Amara's name became a tool, a label thrown into boardroom banter and brunch conversations, and men who'd never met her laughed while saying things like, "So the CEO almost married a street hawker?" And women who'd never heard her speak rolled their eyes, calling her just another village girl, trying to climb with her face and sympathy, and while Obiora burned quietly, unsure how to shield her from a storm he caused, Amara faced the whispers with that same quiet dignity she always carried, though inside her something began to unravel, not because of the insults, but because she had started to miss the conversations they used to have, the sound of his voice when he wasn't pretending, and the thought that maybe, just maybe, he hadn't meant to hurt her but simply didn't know how to stop hiding. And then came the letter, not a text or phone call, but a folded piece of cream paper slipped under her door one evening as she returned from the market, no name on the front, only a careful scrawl in black ink that said, "I owe you truth," and when she opened it, she saw Obiora's handwriting, shaky but honest, telling her that the blindness had begun as a joke, then a habit, then a wall he could not tear down, that he had grown tired of women who only saw his bank account and not the weight he carried, that he never expected her to stay, and that each time she showed up with food and laughter, something inside him broke and healed at the same time, and he ended with, "I never meant to let you walk away, but I was too afraid to walk toward you without the lie I'd lived in. If you can forgive me, I'll open my eyes for good." And Amara read the letter once, twice, then folded it and placed it inside her pillowcase, unsure if her heart was ready, unsure if trust could be rebuilt with words alone. But before she could decide, another hand reached into the story. Ikechukwu, Obiora's jealous cousin who had long dreamt of inheriting part of the company, teamed up with Nneka to forge a marriage announcement and leak it to a popular online blog, complete with fake photos of Obiora holding Nneka's hand at an event he never attended. And when the news broke, the internet exploded with headlines like "CEO Obiora finds love in high society" and "Amara who? Mystery girl dumped for business princess." And while Obiora was in a meeting in Lagos, his phone lit up with messages asking him to confirm, and his own employees began whispering in corridors, and the board began asking if he was finally settling down, and Amara, seeing the headlines on a neighbor's phone, felt the last sliver of faith crumble in her chest, and for 2 days she did not speak to anyone except the widow's children, choosing instead to walk for hours along the quieter streets of Abosi, passing old men who sold bicycle tires, girls weaving hair under mango trees, and the mosque where voices rose in late afternoon prayers, wondering all the while whether love was just another trick people played on themselves to escape loneliness, until on the third day, Obiora stood at her door, no glasses, no guards, no driver, just a plain shirt and the look of a man who had walked through a storm to find his way back to something real, and when she opened the door and saw him, they stared at each other in silence, both afraid to speak, until Amara said, "So now the whole city thinks I was just another mistake," and Obiora, swallowing his pride like bitter leaf, said, "I don't care what the city thinks, I care what you think," and Amara stepped aside and let him in, and they sat on her narrow wooden bench, surrounded by the smell of fried oil and cassava flour, and for the first time, they spoke not as performer and audience, but as two people trying to understand how two truths could collide without destroying each other, and Obiora explained everything, the fake story, the lies planted by his family, the pressure to marry someone like Neka, and Amara listened, nodding, asking questions, until finally she said, "I don't need you to be perfect, Obiora, I just need you to be honest," and for the first time in years, Obiora wept, not loudly, but with the quiet sobs of a man who had forgotten how to be vulnerable, and she held his hand, not because she had forgiven everything, but because she saw that he was finally choosing truth over pride, and when he left that night, he did not ask her to return with him or to pretend things were fine, he only said, "When you're ready, the door is open," and he meant it, and over the next few weeks, their story took on new shape, no longer bound by lies or misunderstandings, but by the slow, patient rebuilding of trust. Amara began visiting the company, not as a guest but as a trainee, working under a small department led by one of Obiora's loyal managers who didn't care where she came from but saw her intelligence quickly, and while some staff whispered, others welcomed her, especially after she handled a stubborn vendor who had refused to sign a logistics deal for months. She convinced him in 1 hour, not with threats or tactics, but with honest negotiation and clarity, and the news reached Obiora before the ink on the contract dried, and he smiled quietly, knowing she was beginning to shine on her own, and as their relationship slowly found new footing, the storms did not stop. Neka, furious that her plan had failed, threatened to sue for defamation. Ikechukwu started pushing for an emergency board vote to reduce Obiora's influence, and Madame Chinyu began holding secret meetings with a rival company to broker her own version of a family coup, but Obiora, now walking with open eyes and firmer steps, was ready, and as Amara stood by his side, not as a rescuer but as a partner who had seen both his weakness and strength, the company, the city, and even his family began to see something new, a man who had once pretended blindness but now saw clearly what mattered, and a woman who had arrived without name or title but now carried more power than any of them expected, and as the rains returned to Obosi, washing the streets clean and filling the air with the smell of earth and mango leaves, Obiora and Amara stood beneath his garden's old almond tree, no longer hiding, no longer running, and though the road ahead would still have shadows, they now had the courage to walk it, eyes open, hands joined, hearts wide. By the time the first rumblings of betrayal reached the ears of Obiora and Amara, the rainy season had begun in Obosi, turning the earth soft and red beneath the feet of children who leapt over puddles with laughter, unaware that in the tall buildings above, power was shifting like thunderclouds over palm fronds, for while Amara was slowly earning her place in the company, not by name or association, but by hard work, clarity, and the kind of quiet intelligence that made older men nod thoughtfully during meetings, Madame Chinyu and her loyal allies, led by a now desperate and reckless Ikechukwu, were sowing seeds of revolt behind closed doors, crafting a coup not just against Obiora's leadership but against the very change he represented, and as Amara helped secure 2 major partnerships with new distribution hubs in the north, whispers began to circle the boardroom about her influence, her origins, and whether it was wise for someone with no pedigree to be seated beside the CEO at investor dinners, and while Obiora dismissed the gossip at first, trusting in performance to silence envy. Amara saw the looks, the backhanded comments, the exaggerated kindness that dripped with sarcasm, and she knew enough to understand that what they couldn't fight publicly, they would try to rot privately, and so she told Obiora one evening as they walked through the company garden, the same one where they had first spoken after the truth about his eyes had come to light. These people are not afraid of failure, they're afraid of a woman like me rewriting the story they've already written, and Obiora, who had learned to listen more than defend, simply nodded and tightened his grip on her hand, for he had begun to realize that power was not simply about wealth or name, but about who others believed deserved it, and in the city of Abosi, where colonial legacies still whispered through contracts and names still opened more doors than merit, Amara's rise was not just unexpected, it was unacceptable to many, and that made her dangerous to the very ones who clung to tradition not for respect but for control. And when Obiora's father, Chief Omenka, who had been silent for many months, suddenly announced that he would be attending the company's quarterly general meeting, something he hadn't done since his retirement, the entire company paused, for they knew it meant something was stirring. And on the morning of the meeting, the sky was ashen, heavy with clouds that seemed to lean against the rooftops, and Amara, dressed in a simple green iroh and blouse with her hair tied back in a single braid, walked beside Obiora into the room packed with shareholders, executives, and a few well-positioned journalists, and though her back was straight, her heart pounded, for she sensed that what lay ahead would not be a meeting but a battlefield, and sure enough, as soon as the opening reports were presented and Obiora began to speak about the year's growth, Ikechukwu stood and interrupted, a smirk on his lips, waving a folder of documents like a fan, saying, "While we applaud progress, we must ask, is this growth the result of business acumen, or pillow-side persuasion?" And the room gasped softly, while Obiora's face remained still, but his jaw tightened, and Amara turned her head slowly, locking eyes with the man who had once shared bread with her in the family compound and now stood before strangers trying to destroy her, and before Obiora could speak, Madame Chinyu rose like a market woman who had found a thief, pointing a dramatic finger at Amara and saying, "Let us not pretend. This girl is charming the CEO, manipulating company decisions, and threatening our legacy. What do we really know about her? Who trained her? Where did she come from?" And someone from the back muttered, "True talk," while others shook their heads, and Obiora stood up fully now, raising one hand for silence, saying clearly, "I will answer your questions, not because I owe you, but because truth deserves voice. Amara did not come here to beg or to seduce, she came with ideas, with honesty, with more discipline than most of you born into privilege, and if that makes you uncomfortable, perhaps it's your competence we should be questioning." And the room fell silent, the kind of silence that feels like a wire pulled tight, and in that moment, Chief Omenka finally stood, his frame older, slightly hunched, but his voice still thunderous, saying, "I watched many of you grow from boys to men, and I regret to say, many of you never learned the difference between power and poison. I have studied this girl Amara from afar, and I say this today. She reminds me of the woman I once loved, the one who built this house with me. Not with charm, but with sweat, and if any of you think legacy comes from your surname, then you have already failed." And with those words, the balance shifted, but not for long, because Madame Chinyu was not finished, and that night she met with a shadowy lawyer in a lounge where only the wealthiest ever gathered, handing over a forged document designed to challenge the ownership structure of the company, claiming that Obiora's original shares had been mishandled, and if proven in court, would strip him of decision-making rights until the matter was resolved. And before the week ended, Obiora received a court summons, freezing parts of the company's assets and casting doubt across every corner of the business world, and journalists now reported with glee, love triangle or corporate scandal? Abosi's golden empire shaken by insider war, and Obiora, though calm on the surface, found himself fighting battles on every side, the law, the board, the media, and even within himself, for he had never expected that the consequences of truth would come so swiftly, and Amara, refusing to hide or run, returned to work each day as though the world wasn't spinning, And even when she heard staff refer to her as that village girl who brought thunder, she smiled with the same grace she wore like a second skin, until one day, as she was leaving the office, a man approached her in a quiet alley, handing her a flash drive and saying, "He said you would know what to do," and before she could ask who, he vanished into the traffic, and later that night, she opened the drive and found hours of hidden recordings, conversations between Madame Chinyu and Ikechukwu, voice notes between Neka and the shady lawyer, even a draft letter to a corrupt judge offering money for a favorable verdict, and Amara knew then that the truth was not just enough to clear Obiora's name, it was enough to bury their enemies once and for all, but she also knew that playing that card meant war, and so she brought it to Obiora and asked him, "If we do this, there's no turning back, are you ready?" And Obiora, standing in the balcony of their private apartment overlooking the Ibosi skyline, said, "If we must clean a house, we must sweep every corner," and the next day, the recordings were leaked anonymously to a trusted journalist, one who had grown up in the same muddy streets as Amara and still believed in justice, and the fallout was instant. The judge was suspended, the lawyer arrested, and a formal investigation launched into Madame Chinyu's dealings, while Ikechukwu vanished from public view, and Neka was last seen at the airport, her heels clicking on the tile as she fled to South Africa with a suitcase full of silence. And for the first time, the company stood unshaken by a man who had unmasked himself, and a woman who needed no title to command respect. And when the chairman of the National Commerce Forum came to visit weeks later, he addressed Amara first, saying, "You may not have gone to their schools, but you've taught all of us what legacy truly means." And that night, under the warm lights of the annual company gala, Obiora took Amara's hand in front of every guest and said, "This is not just my partner in business, but the one who opened my eyes. When they were closed, I saw the world through lies, and she showed me the truth," and Amara, smiling, whispered, "And you let me see that even thrones can be shared when built with love." And as the guests clapped and the night air filled with the sound of drums from a local troupe hired to celebrate their new season, the storm that had once threatened to destroy everything had become the very wind that swept away the old, leaving in its place two people who no longer hid, no longer bowed, and who now stood side by side, not because tradition said so, but because they had chosen each other, with eyes wide open. In the weeks that followed the collapse of Madame Chinyu's schemes and the quiet exile of Ikechukwu and Neka, the city of Ibosi did not forget, for while some stories live only in headlines, others, like the tale of a CEO who once pretended to be blind and the village girl who taught him to see, settled deep in the soil of people's minds, sprouting into stories told over roasted maize fires and under mango trees during long rains. And though Obiora and Amara never asked to be famous, they became a kind of quiet legend in the mouths of market women and taxi drivers, who pointed at their pictures on billboards and said, "Ah, there is the girl who brought sense back to our big man." And in truth, Obiora was not the same man anymore. Gone was the CEO who sat with closed eyes, calculating love like a balance sheet. In his place stood a man who laughed more, listened longer, and carried his name not like a sword, but like a broom, sweeping away pride wherever it gathered. And beside him was Amara, no longer the shy visitor walking past tall gates, but now a partner in every sense, officially made co-director of the company's social enterprise wing, where she built programs to train village girls in business, digital skills, and self-confidence, making her name known not through gossip, but through quiet waves of impact that moved from Ibosi to Kano, from Aba to Accra. And yet, despite all this, Amara remained rooted, still buying garden eggs from the woman near her old compound, still greeting gatekeepers by name, still wearing her mother's wrapper on days when she missed home, and in the silence between all the noise, she and Obiora continued to grow, not in the way stories often shout, but in the way trees grow after storms, quietly, deeply, and surely. And though the company continued to flourish, with new investors praising their resilience, there were still cracks to mend, not just in business, but in family. For Obiora had not spoken to his father since the meeting where Chief Omenka defended Amara but then retreated into silence once the legal battles began, and one afternoon, as the sun leaned over the city in a golden haze. Obiora drove alone to his father's old house, parked beneath the mango tree he used to climb as a child, and sat in silence beside the old man who was peeling oranges with the same small knife he'd used for decades. And for a long time they said nothing, just sat with the weight of everything unsaid, until finally Chief Ominka said, "You know, I used to wonder if you'd ever find someone who would break you, not with a fight, but with the truth." And Obiora smiled quietly and replied, "She didn't break me, Papa, she helped me see what I'd been afraid to face." And the old man nodded, offering him half an orange, and in that simple gesture, forgiveness was passed between them without needing ceremony. And when Amara visited the next week, Chief Ominka told her, "If I had had a daughter, I would have wanted her to be like you, not loud, not soft, just steady." And she bowed with a small smile and said, "And I would have liked a father who peels oranges without bitterness." And they both laughed, and the past was slowly folded away like a well-worn cloth, still present but no longer painful. And as the months passed, the city of Obosi continued to move to its beat, the markets buzzed, the taxis honked, and the elders still argued beneath the baobab. But in one corner of the city, where the land sloped gently toward a river that sang in the evening, Obiora and Amara began to build something new, a learning center that bore no one's name, just the symbol of two eyes open wide, carved into a simple gate. And there, children came to learn coding beside cooking, storytelling beside spreadsheets, because Amara believed that knowledge should be both modern and rooted, and Obiora agreed, for he had learned the hard way that intelligence without humility is just noise. And one evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned the color of ripe mangoes, they sat together on the steps of the center, watching the children chase each other barefoot through dust and laughter. And Amara leaned her head on Obiora's shoulder and said, "You know, if someone had told me that love would find me through a lie, I would have laughed." And Obiora replied, "If someone had told me I'd open my eyes not for business, but for a girl with roasted corn, I would have fired them." And they both laughed, not because it was funny, but because laughter is how people survive the strange poetry of fate. And then, in the quiet that followed, Obiora reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch, not flashy or grand, but worn and soft, and handed it to Amara, who opened it and found a simple beaded ring, the kind their ancestors wore not to impress, but to promise. And Obiora said, "This is not just for marriage, this is my vow that no matter how far we rise, I'll never close my eyes again." And Amara, tears gathering like dew, whispered, "And I vow never to stop reminding you how far we've come." And they placed the ring on her finger together, like planting a seed, not for applause or headlines, but for themselves. And that night, a gentle rain fell on Obosi, the kind that washes without rushing, and across the city, people slept, some with dreams, some with silence, but none knowing that in a house by the river, two people once divided by lies were now united by truth. And their story of a CEO who pretended blindness to protect himself and a village girl who saw through every wall, would not end with a wedding or riches, but with the quiet certainty that real love does not begin with perfection, but with the courage to unmask, to forgive, and to walk forward with eyes truly open. Please subscribe for more tales, like, share with friends, and drop a comment below. Your support keeps these stories alive. Thank you for being part of the Folktales BIJ family.